This meeting is being live streamed. Okay, we're live.
Well, let me just check that we are on.
Yeah, I can see it's showing up on my screen.
Oh, yeah, there we are. Cool.
We're
Great.
in, we're in the right place, right?
We are in the right place.
Good stuff. Great. Yeah.
That was you again. Sorry, it just came up as
Okay.
um anyway, yes, let's crack on then. So, hello, Jason.
Hello, Charlie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Um, we have organised this live so that we can come in and speak to you how unseen trauma shows up as a sort of introductory session to you and to me and for the group that is newly established. So welcome to all of you who have joined. If you're watching this now, if you're watching this later, let us know in the comments. It would be lovely to hear from you. But first, we're going to do a little bit of a background or a mini background for those of you that don't know either me or Jason about our experience. Would you like to go first, Jason?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Lucy. I just saw you saying hello. Good to see you. Um, yeah, thanks for doing that. And a little bit rabbit in the headlights. So it takes me a minute to settle down, you know. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and it's great to get this opportunity to share the work that we do with people that really want to or are willing to, because that's probably the right word, to look inside themselves for answers, you know, because it can be very challenging and it can be scary and it can be highly rewarding and beautiful as well, you know. So my I mean, like my story's got so many facets of chaos and craziness. You know, it's kind of that happened all as an attempt to manage myself and to cope with my internal experience. And I like to differentiate, between traumatic events and trauma. You know, like in this way that I had a traumatic event. Uh, my dad was killed. He went out. He didn't come back. You know, he was killed in an accident, and the next thing I remember was the police at the door. You know, it's kind of like, and then all sorts of shit that happened from there on. You know, and in the work that I've done, you know, I've realised that there was a lot of trauma before that. You know, a lot of disconnection from mother, a lot of abandonment stuff. You know, that showed up, you know, as what we would call unseen trauma in this exploration that we were doing in my life, in relationships, in friendships, in all sorts of ways, you know. After the traumatic event, you know, there was a lot more because, I lost one parent physically, I lost the other parent emotionally, you know. And we're going to talk in this webinar a little bit about the development and the sort of the installation of programming, you know, of kind of what happens to us in that experience. And like what happened for me was the other parent was not there. So it was basically work it out for yourself. And as a child needs love and nurturing and connection and affection and reflection from a stable other, you know, it's like there was none of that for me. So there's nothing other than traumatic experience, overwhelm of the nervous system, the body's reactions, and ways to escape that, you know. And children, like I was, are very resilient and creative, and they find ways to cope that's not always seen as socially acceptable. You know, in fact, it's pathologized and it's given a label, you know, like most coping mechanisms are. And we're talking here beyond labels and beyond pathologies of normal human response to adversity, because that's what trauma is. It's normal human response to adversity. So yeah, I did those normal human responses to adversity in abundance. You know, that's what my life was. It was addiction. It was eating disorders. It was psychiatric diagnosis from 10 years old and multiple psychiatric interventions, special units, psychiatric care, locked wards, prisons, institutions, medications after medications after medications, on top of street drugs and homelessness, and all those things that I'm not going to go into, you know. And even when I found myself free of my drug addiction, you know, I just basically, it was just like whack-a-mole, because addiction, like I just said, was only ever the coping mechanism. So it was just, once you took away my substance related coping mechanism, I found a behavioral related coping mechanism, you know, which was the gym, my body, food, you know, other stuff. And I used those things to continue to escape my internal experience that I could not be with. I couldn't be with my body. I couldn't be in my body. You know, my mind was overwhelmed. My beliefs, my psychological beliefs and ideas about myself and about life were overwhelming. And I was a victim, you know, I was just a victim. I lived life as a victim, even though seemed like I was doing well to everyone else because I'd stopped taking drugs and alcohol. I wasn't physically self-destructing anymore, and I wasn't going to jail anymore. You know, internally, I was dying. And that's why I became a psychotherapist, not because any other reason other than I wanted to help myself and I wanted to find freedom within myself, you know. And I mean, some of the extremities, you know, in that time when I was training as a therapist, I was digging into the past. It was so painful. I was still acting out. I was trying multiple ways on a daily basis just to be okay. And, you know, to the point of I had 6, 7 cosmetic surgeries trying to change my body on the outside to fix the inside. You know, I was a desperate attempt to find happiness, you know, in extreme ways. That's what we do. That's one of the things that we will do to fix this internal discomfort with the internal experience of these protection mechanisms that we've developed. It's anything like that, you know, if we think it'll find us happiness or find us peace, we'll go to those extremes. I certainly did in many ways. So yeah, after years of psychotherapy training and multiple modalities of and letters and qualifications and certifications, you know, I still sat there thinking I'm not happy. You know, I'm not happy. I did the Hoffman process. I did the Landmark Forum. I did silent meditations. I read spiritual books. I was in 12 steps for 20 plus years, you know, and it's like, and I still felt miserable. And that's kind of like where this journey now to where I am now really started, you know, like the end of that journey of that self-destructing in the outside world was a realization that this stuff had been happening despite me. It had been, you know, this was not me. This thing that I'd been in, that I'd been experiencing, that I'd been living, that I'd been believing to be a victim of, you know, all the experience of myself, what was happening was not me. You know, that was my start of this, looking deeper into this trauma stuff. You know, at first it was a journey into the 3 principles, which kind of woke me up from the psychological dream that I'd been in, you know, so to speak, but it didn't find me respite or an embodied experience of life. You know, it gave me some freedom from the stories that I've been telling about myself. And how much time do you want me to spend on this, by the way, just so I know? I'll wrap it up quickly.
Well, yeah, well, whatever. Just we're gonna like do one, you know, a little bit each, and then
Yeah, all right, another few minutes then. Let me just finish it off. I didn't want to take too long. Yes. Sorry.
I'm only joking.
I know.
We're in your flow now, haven't I?
Yeah, terrible. Yeah, so like that experience really woke me up to something. You know, it woke me up to the dream of my own mind. It woke me up to something, some deeper truths. It woke me up to that the idea that my well-being had always been with me. You know, and for a while I kind of bypassed myself. You know, in that belief. Because it is just a belief, you know, your well-being is inside of you. Okay, then now I'm fixed. You know, it's kind of like, it's just an idea until you see it. You know, it's kind of like, you can't understand the idea and then be fixed. You know, it's kind of like, it doesn't work that way, but it's a direction to look in. And when you find it for yourself, you know, it's kind of like, it's inclusive. What I had to come to the point of is kind of like seeing that you can't spiritualize the body away. You cannot use spiritual concepts of any depth. You know, not non-duality points to absolute truth. The three principles, Sid's original experience was a non-dual experience. It points to absolute truth. You know, it's like, but we're not absolute beings. We're relative beings living in a body relative to an external world and things, objects, people, places, situations, circumstances. So all this unseen trauma stuff starts to show up as in a way of contractions, sensations, and perceptions. You know, perceptions of what you're doing is wrong, and I'm affected by it like this because, and you need to change that to make me okay, or I need to get more of this, or change that, or do this, or fix that, or change. All this stuff was showing up. And what I experience in my body is the nervous system overwhelm, you know, just but in a habitual way that I've always experienced it, that I just think is down to you or something else outside of myself.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and that's kind of like that's what I've been in, that exploration, and that's what really brought me to want to do this course and this training and this stuff and these sessions and this all the stuff that we're doing here with people is because it's been such a beautiful heart opening, a beautiful and challenging, you know, heart opening experience to become connected to myself and to stop trying to spiritualize and dismiss my own body's experience and responses to life and this trauma stuff that I learned as an innocent coping mechanism, you know, as a child, and now plays out in my life at times, you know, and it's like so I have to be willing to be in that uncomfortable place sometimes, you know, to really look at what's going on and learn to regulate myself and just to acknowledge the dysregulation, you know, vulnerably, like to acknowledge that sometimes I'm fucked up and I do crazy shit, you know, it's kind of like as a way of coping with what goes on in my body, you know, not because I'm broken or because there's something wrong with me, but and this is all part of what, you know, I'd love to share with people, what I'd love to go on a journey of what I do in my own work with people is go on this journey. And I don't want to say this is 100%, but almost like to the point where I see almost all suffering is related to this. Almost all suffering is related to that dysregulation, to that nervous system overwhelm, to that childhood experience of lack of nurturing, lack of love, or full of shame or criticism, or the more extreme things like violence and abuse and sexual approach, and then the tragedy and the terminally ill, you know, when you're affected by terminal illness and all these things that have a huge effect on the nervous system, that almost all suffering that shows up in our adult life in some way is traced back to this, you know. I don't think I've actually come across anything that isn't, you know. So it's a brilliant place to look because there will absolutely be a connection between present day suffering and something, you know, something that happened. And it's not that you have to dig into your childhood, it's whatever's showing up in the present moment. And sorry, I keep going on. So I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself and whatever you'd like to share.
All right, you're not going on. It's like one of these topics that, you know, we could probably talk about for a whole day. And hopefully when we do, you know, launch our program and, you know, as part of that program, we are hoping to do 2 days together at the end so that we can incorporate so much of this information and meet in person, because there is a lot to discuss. And these are kind of, you know, we are complex beings, and each case is very nuanced to the individual. But what's universal, as we both know, and I'm sure that some of our audience probably have an awareness of, is that, you know, what's universal is that we are kind of using it is inside out, and we have this very amazing and very brilliant nervous system that is created in utero. And so often, sometimes those responses have been from our mother line anyway. So yeah, it's deep and it's complex and it's very, very interesting. And my own journey and reason Jason and I connected originally through Principles World was because when I first heard his story about tragic death, it's one of those it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, someone else understands what that's like the horrificness of losing, for me, it was two people in a very tragic circumstances, and what that can do to a human being if you haven't got one solid, grounded human around you, which I didn't have. And so for me, at that point in my life, when I was 21, it led to, workaholism, drug addiction, alcohol use, prescription medication addiction, over-the-counter medication addiction, so many things that I was trying to do to manage my experience, which I didn't even know. And this was a really big, a very interesting learning for me, because for many years, from 21, my father died eventually, and if you read my bio, there's more information about what I went through. But when he died, and I started this kind of learning, and I fell into the principles world by fluke, and then my learnings deepened as I've kept working as a coach and having my own coach, and deepening my understanding of the inside out nature of life, of the body. I've worked with the body for some 20 years anyway. My realization was, for fuck's sakes, Charlie, it didn't start when you were 21, when your brother died and your father became disabled. It actually started when you were very young, and there were things that were happening to me that were out of my control, that I didn't know how to deal with. But as a child, the way that my system helped me deal with that, the wisdom of my body that helped me deal with that, was to put me into shut down and freeze, which then had, over many years, physical manifestations of being in shut down and freeze, including but not limited to, my hair all fell out, and alopecia, and I had, very bad skin and broken nails, and then I would, pick my face and do all sorts of, the habits of behavior continued for many, many years afterwards. And so I worked with the body from the age of, say, 30 until now, and then prior to that I was an addiction specialist. But all the while, behind this kind of successful front of house human, I was getting up to lots of behaviors that I judged and shamed and hid and became secretive about, and was doing that because I didn't want people to know who I really was, because I thought I was a bad person. I thought I was broken. I thought I had to continue to wear this mask, and made careers out of taking care of other people, because I thought that might fix myself. So all of my learning was based around my own seeking to understand my experience. None of that has been wasted. I see all of my experience, all of my learnings, all of my multiple qualifications, because it was never enough. There was never enough. It was never good enough, as being relevant, but not necessary in the way that I used to feel. Like, I feel mostly okay and good enough now. But in terms of like my understanding about the glitches that I was coming up with, the principles gave me a really deep, profound, like you, Jason, understanding of like the nature of who I actually was underneath the adaptive behaviors and thoughts that had kept me safe. Then I started coming up against glitches and glitches and glitches, where these things were coming back. And that's when I started to explore deeper into the body and the nervous system, or life invited me to. I feel very lucky, actually. And that's how I became aware of the unseen trauma and the programming and the conditioning and the habitual, neurologically wired way my body had responded over many years. So, it might have looked to me that someone was rejecting me, say if they, came out of my business, or if I lost a friendship. But what that was actually pointing me to was an unseen belief that had been created when I was much, much younger, that I wasn't good enough, that I needed to do X, Y, Z to be lovable. And when somebody in the external world, in my current circumstances, was doing something that upset me, I would blame them. So I was bringing my past unconsciously and innocently into the present situation, and being a victim. And like you, I was absolutely, but completely unconsciously identified with being a victim in my life. And thank God I don't feel like that most of the time. 90% of the time I can feel it like there's a hook, like, but mostly I know I'm the creator of this experience. So where do you want to go from here, Jason? Do you want to like look at how the trauma, sort of the unseen trauma, manifested for you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, in so many unseen trauma, I mean, like, it's unseen trauma because we can't make a conscious connection between our projection onto the external world and the suffering that we have and the connecting of the dots. You know, there's no dots. It's kind of like, that's why it's unseen. It's like, it's not obvious to us why. I feel like you use the example of people leaving the business. You know, it's kind of, I could use the same example of clients saying no to me. You know, it's kind of like, no, I don't like what you do, or no, it doesn't resonate with me, or something. You know, it's kind of like, oh, you know, where does that like little pull of the heart come from? You know, they don't like me, they don't love me, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And it's like, I just take that as a rejection, and in my life I just don't like rejection, you know, and it happens loads of times with all sorts of stuff, with work and relationships and my kids and different things. And it's like, there's no way that I can see that that's down to something, some early childhood belief or some idea or something that was created in me as a way of protecting myself, you know. That's one example, you know. Relationships, you know, my insecurity shows up, you know, and that for me at this point in the past, the way that showed up would be that I would be, let's talk about relationships, this is a good one. I would, when I was completely asleep and oblivious, I would absolutely chase abuse, rejection, ignorance, coldness, harshness. I was absolutely in love with that. You know, it's kind of like, I thought that was love. You know, that was my connection to love. It was like, because in the body, we don't know the difference between anxiety and excitement. We are often, when we're completely asleep to the fact that experience is created within, we can believe that that experience of the body is love. People call it butterflies, you know. And I remember Harville Hendrix, who wrote the book Getting the Love You Want, wrote, no, that feeling is that you're just about to relive your childhood. You know, that's what the feeling is kind of like, quite often when way, you know, it's kind of like the experience that you have in your body that many people chase is really the indicator that you're just about to relive your childhood. Because what's going to happen is this situation, and this is what happened to me all the time, I would meet these people that would bring out all this horrible stuff in me, you know, I'd feel so hurt and it'd be so painful and I couldn't get away from it, you know. And so I would act in ways that were inappropriate, you know. I would chase people, I would want to, you know, I would give up myself, you know, for somebody else. So that's a very common thing to happen for people, you know, and I think in more later life, you know, it's like the insecurity still shows up for me, the abandonment wound, the mother wound things, they still show up for me from time to time, but I just feel it in the body in a very vulnerable and painful way, you know. It's kind of like, I still have a strong sense of self and a willingness to be vulnerable and to own my stuff and to be in that feeling and to be in my body, you know. It's kind of like, even when it's painful. And that's just showing the difference, because I'm no longer in any way attracted to any of that shit that I was chasing before, you know. In fact, I have a very loving, open, vulnerable, and authentic connection with in my relationship, you know, and it's beautiful. And but I still have that struggle, you know. So that's like, for me, they were big things. So I think particularly because I had the abandonment wound, and then my dad left me. You know, it's kind of like, so it was like a cosmic abandonment, you know, of both parents, from a child point of view, from a nervous system overwhelm point of view, you know. And I'll finish on this. I couldn't ever really know myself other than memories. It was very difficult to kind of relate to my childhood self, you know, in other than any form of memory that I had. But I have a still feeling. I have a now 6 year old, you know, that was five, that's the same age that I was, you know, like when I lost my dad. And like, while he's very rowdy and boisterous, he's very gentle and sensitive too, you know. And in the last year, quite a lot of times, you know, I got that reflection from him of what it must be like to be five, you know, and to really sort of need an endless amount of love and affection and care, you know, and stuff like that. And it really made me think back about my own childhood, about what it must be like to have that overwhelming situation where you just lose both parents, you know. So yeah, I mean, like, there's so many other ways in every way, you know. It's kind of like that you can relate all of suffering, all struggles to this in some way, but those are just a couple of common examples from my life of how things showed up, you know.
Mm. And I think you sort of touched on something really important there, which is like the space and acknowledgement and ownership and awareness to bring loving kindness to that emotion that was not allowed to be authentically expressed or held or seen as a young human yourself, which, like, your son is giving you the gift of being able to maybe touch that place and allow it.
Mm.
So much of what I see and what I've experienced in my own life is that, you know, the body literally does keep the score, like the pains and the aches and the physical illnesses, whatever, you know, autoimmunes that are arising, you know, like potentially decades in the making, are your body's way of trying to get you to come back into the body to understand what you needed to express. Like, there was, you know, like for me, one of my experiences as a young child was that my mum used to sort of take me somewhere, leave me and drive off. So I was like 4 or 5 years old. So the experience was I've been literally abandoned, sort
Mm.
of scared and, you know, fearful, and would have done anything to make her happy. And so one of the ways that unseen trauma has showed up for me is that I was a huge people pleaser and wanted to, you know, my whole career has been about taking care of people. And I subsequently took care of my dad from his accident in 93 until he died in 2016. It's like, please love me, I'll take care of you, please never be upset with me, because that might mean that you will abandon me. Now, those things, those parts of us are still running the show unconsciously. Like, there's been moments in my life as a business owner where people have rejected me. Like, that's been my experience. That's not the truth, right? That isn't ever the truth, but it's had this sort of visceral reaction where I'm physically shaking with fear in my body. And that, although like shaking is a good thing, like we want to kind of move it out and shake it out, but that didn't happen when I was a child. Now, as an adult, the shaking and the fear and the kind of things that were going on for me, I would suppress because I felt shame. And I didn't understand why I was having this visceral reaction to certain experiences or certain types of people. And I made little like loopholes, like, oh, I only get on with men, I hate women, right? So that was a massive sort of generalization. And I stuck to that for a long time, even though I've worked predominantly with women for the last 20 years. I still felt like, no, I get on better with men. But that was because my experience of my mother was one of fear. And I was scared. And I had this really interesting moment when my auntie died, when my mum was reading at her funeral. Now, they hadn't spoken for most of their lives, so that was interesting in itself. But I suddenly saw this woman at the top in the church with her normal kind of what I would always have perceived for 40, however many years, as aggressive and unpleasant. I suddenly saw anxiety, fear, vulnerability. Her protector part was aggression, like fuck off. Mine, as the child receiving that, was like, I'll look after you, I'll make you better. So there's this sort of really interesting thing that I see now where her protector part was to be like, however she was. My response in tune to her, because don't forget, as children, we are co-regulating with our parents. We're looking for them to attune to us. And if that's not happening, we find ways either to make sure that they do attune to us by being whatever we need to be around them, or we self-soothe in some way, whatever that might look like. Of course, every human is unique. Every life experience is unique, like literally separate realities. No one human's going to be the same. But universally, the body and the nervous system all work, the same. So once you start to sort of join the dots and allow yourself the expression of what needs to be felt, but it's not like we're saying stay in the feeling, because for some people who've experienced trauma, that's too much, it's too difficult. People don't even understand how their body's talking to you, and actually, it all needs to move through you, but it has been stuck for some time. So if there is repeated patterns for you, if there is repeated feelings, mine came in the form of don't leave me, I'm not good enough, and shame, basically. Like those were the particular flavor that mine. Oh, and people pleasing, like I'll do anything you say. So yeah.
Maybe we touch on somatic stuff, because you mentioned it, and I think it's highly relevant. A lot of people that have had traumatic experiences or trauma throughout their life, express it in some form of somatic way. And like you said, like when I did my psychedelic journey, like the psychedelic medicine forces you into your current somatic place without the ability to suppress, which is what we have as humans in our normal everyday life. And I basically sat shaking, like you just explained, for like 4 hours, literally going like that. I couldn't stop. It just wouldn't stop. And I was so, like when it stopped, I would just lay there feeling stilling, and I thought, fucking hell, it's like so intense. And the therapist that I was with said to me, that's what's happening every day. That's what we just learn to suppress. That's what your nervous system is like, And one of the many ways that it manifests is in our physical being, in bad back, bad neck, as you said, autoimmune stuff, migraines is very common, herniated discs. I mean, I've got physical diagnosis of herniated discs, but as I started to work on this and realized it, I've been pretty free. And to the point, like I had herniated disc where I carried pain medication with me everywhere I went for 20 years. I couldn't go without it. And I had back supports and physios and chiropractors all the fucking time. And it's like, and I don't take medication for my back, and I don't go to see anyone anymore. So I can sort of attest to the amount of impact that working on this stuff and healing and becoming embodied and connected to yourself and seeing this truth that we're talking about how much effect it has on the physical, because I don't even think about my back, to be honest, 99% of the time anymore. Every now and again I get a bit stiff or something happens, which is right because I do have a diagnosis. But the thing is, when we often have got a diagnosis for something, especially the stuff that can't be medically qualified, chronic fatigue like stuff and autoimmune things, we just believe the medical profession, but we don't know how much better it could be. Like I thought, oh yeah, look, I've got a physical diagnosis, this is why I can't walk, I can't get out of bed, some days I couldn't even go to the toilet. It's kind of like I was in that much pain, like 100 out of 10 pain, and I was dosed up on painkillers. It's because I've got a physical diagnosis. And like what's happening in this unseen trauma stuff is the body is dumping cortisol and norepinephrine into the system like in abundance. It's meant to absorb up to 30 minutes a day, but like if you're in a highly stressed trauma response quite often in your life, it could be 16 hours a day that your body's dumping cortisol into your system, and cortisol creates masses of inflammation. So even if you do have a physical diagnosis, you're experiencing it in 100 times worse than it could be, because like the inflammation is exacerbated by the stress, through the way the system works. And so that's just another way, that I thought of that's highly relevant, because almost everyone that I've worked with will either have the migraines or the bad back or the bad neck or the chronic fatigue or something like that, skin conditions, eczema, all these ways in which that stuff shows up in our body,
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's inflammation caused by the stress, caused by shutdown, caused by freeze, caused by years and years and years not understanding how a system has shut down to protect, which is rooted in strength, not weakness. And I think we have and also not just physical symptoms, anxiety, depression, bipolar, all of those things that where people are kind of looking at the surface level, like, well, I've got anxiety and that's why I'm like this. So people then get medicated within a medical model that is, seriously short-sighted in not like looking beneath and to what is the root cause of these things. And so there are hundreds, if not, thousands and thousands of people in this country alone who are medicated on psychiatric medication or pharmaceuticals in some form to manage a surface level, either psychological symptom or physical symptom that could be, with more care and attention and connection and understanding and knowledge, give them the freedom that you and I have, or are coming to experience more and more and more as we have deepened our own understanding of joining the dots, but with loving, compassionate inquiry. One of the ways that I can tell someone's in freeze is that they're continually slagging themselves off. Like you can tell in someone's language. That's another way unseen trauma shows up. It's in someone's language, how they're describing their life, how they feel in their life, how they, the suicidal ideation. That's something that I suffered with for many, 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 many years in before, my brother's accident. Like these are symptoms that are solutions, but they're clues to someone who can understand the ways a human expresses themselves. Is often a huge clue into what their where their nervous system is, and understanding that somatic experience, and then understanding the language. And some people might think in pictures, images, dreams. Like there's loads of different ways, because like I say, human beings are completely unique and use different ways to have these things be expressed.
Yeah. And another thing I think is relevant is kind of like is look, particularly if you've come from some spiritual understanding, is like the body, dialoguing with the body. One of the things that was my introduction to somatic stuff was like going through this process where I was actually asking parts of my body, which is similar to IFS work, and other people's somatic experiencing by Peter Levine and things like that, the way they are is dialoguing with those parts of myself that are protecting me. Like you said, often those things that have manifested are ways of keeping us away from our internal experience that feels too overwhelming. I've got anxiety. Well, the anxiety is covering something else that I don't want to look at. It's just a manifestation in the body of it's a protection mechanism. What we call a protector, and you can dialogue with those protectors. What are you here in service of? And it will talk to you, it'll come back to you, and you can find beliefs held in your body. It's kind of like, it's really easy. You can well, I didn't believe this was true, and someone said to me, try this, and it's like you get into a place of calmness, take a few deep breaths, and they said, right, try saying this. Everything in my life is perfect as it is. Just watch what your body does. Your body just laughs, and because it's your body's way of saying bullshit. Everything is not fucking perfect. Everything's a mess. It's like, so just try it, and you feel yourself tighten and contract, and it's kind of like, okay, so I can see that my body does talk to me. It's kind of like then talk about something that you're struggling with at the moment. Just talk about it. Watch what happens in your body. Okay, I feel my chest tighten. I feel a lump in my throat. I feel restlessness in my legs. Okay, let's talk to the restlessness in your legs. What are you here for? What is it? I'm here for safety. I'm here to protect you. All those things are in service of safety. The restlessness in the hands, the lump in the throat, the tight chest. It's like, I'm getting closer to something vulnerable in myself. It's kind of like, what are you protecting from? Who are you protecting? And it's kind of like, and that's when things like the images, the pictures, the thoughts, different ways come. And I had this experience of seeing myself curled up in a little ball, my legs going via my restless legs, dialoguing with my legs that were a protector of this little boy. I couldn't guess an age, but I could just see him curled up in a ball, that just, and as I got connected to that little boy, it was just like my voice started shaking, and it's kind of like, and my hands started shaking, and I felt that somatic experience. I think it was a pre-verbal trauma thing, but it's just giving a little snippet about how you can really communicate with your body and see what's going on if you're willing. And this stuff takes some bravery and some getting over yourself to have a look at, and really being authentic and feeling stuff that you perhaps don't want to feel. But it's so beautiful too. It's so beautiful to see those innocent parts of yourselves that have just, and all the protectors, they're not like, I think what happens for many of us is we would say, I'm fucking sick of this, that, and the other. I'm sick of acting this way. I'm sick of feeling this way. I'm sick of doing this. I'm sick of this feeling, that experience, this mental thing, mental illness, whatever it is. It's kind of like, but all those things are there as an intelligence. They're an absolute 100% sign that everything is working as it's meant to, because they kept you safe this long. They kept a distance between the vulnerable you and this apparently scary objective world. It's like, that's what they were there in service of. So none of this work and what we do in our group and what we help people see and what we explore is criticism or shame based or anything. In fact, it's undoing. It's an undoing of all that, and it's seeing the innocence and the beauty of the system, of how it works and how it protects us and keeps us safe, that just feels uncomfortable in the moment, especially with a lack of understanding of what's playing out.
Yeah, and I think what we're also hoping to do, as a deeper exploration with the program that we will be promoting, that we are, here to discuss, is like how easy it is for people to jump from the body into the mind, and that's when they kind of go into shame and blame and start to try and analyze what's wrong with them. It's so quick seeing people go from the body and back up to the head, and we will be trying to, in the best way that we can. You have to handle the nervous system with finesse and care, and it's like, titration, the process of titration, where in chemistry, if we've got two liquids and we're pouring one and we throw it in, and there's a freaking great big explosion. We're not going to be throwing all this information at you. That's why we're coming on and doing these lives, so you get a feel for us and who we are. What we hope to do by the process of titration is to gently pour it in little by little, so it starts to kind of mix together, and you start to feel how you jump in from your body to your head, how the unseen trauma may be manifesting in you, in your own psyche. Don't jump, don't listen to us and then go, right, what are all my unseen, unconscious, we don't want you to go there. We'd like to help you get there and explore it together, but don't try and jump there on your own, because these things have been hidden for a reason. These things have been protecting you for a long time, and they will want to justify their existence and keep themselves in the game because it's worked, even though it's been uncomfortable for probably a long time, and it certainly was for me. But I had to take responsibility for being wedded to my version of events, and it was very difficult and took a fairly long time for me to have the space and the eyes and the safety to be able to see that wasn't necessarily the truth. And I'd been fighting for a version of my life that was based on fear and not understanding our brilliance. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. One thing I feel is important to, at the start of the journey, to highlight is, for me, the difference in this work that we're doing and traditional therapy and traditional understandings of trauma, and traditional spiritual work. It's kind of because this to me feels like an incorporation of all, grounded in the fundamental understanding of true nature and well-being. Now, for me as a therapist, I want to dig into the past, in my past life, let's say, I would want to dig into the past, and I could sit in the dark with anyone, but I had no clue of the mechanisms or functions of what was playing out with trauma. I could connect dots for people, and we could both sit in the dark, but none of us knew where the light switch was. That's how I described it, And then when I came on my spiritual journey, that the body was completely dismissed. In most spiritual conversations, you'll rarely hear anyone acknowledging trauma, or even, perhaps in my work with Rupert, he's very acknowledging of the body, and he calls it residue, layers of tension laid down in the nervous system, but there's not much conversation about it. It's not dismissed in that conversation, it's very much acknowledged. But for many spiritual teachers, it's completely, there's no body, it's everything's of the mind, it's all created by a thought, all your contractions and sensations are actually created by a thought, which is not true. It's not true in the slightest. They're perceived by a thought, they're not created by a thought. And somatic work is beautiful and valuable if it makes sense. It's a deep exploration of the body, but it needs to be grounded in that same understanding of well-being, because otherwise you can just, all these little individual pockets of psychotherapy or counseling or spiritual approaches, they're all dismissive of something. It's kind of like they're not including, they're really not really helping people to see their true nature in this. Everything's working perfectly, the perfection of the design. The somatic work will just kind of look at what's showing up in the body now, and that does not. You need the psychological, the spiritual, and the somatic exploration together to be able to really see yourself as whole and get to this place of well-being and become, notice you're having this experience. It's not you, it's happening in your body. It's been programmed in there. It's kind of what's going on here? Be curious about it, but it doesn't take you away from the fact that, you're okay. There's a fundamental grounding in that sense of okayness, a deep knowing of being okay regardless of experience, and it's not trying to, like in other stuff, it's not trying to spiritualize experience away. It's not it's not going into a rabbit hole where you think you're completely broken and damaged, because all these individual things that I talked about will take you one way or the other. One will take you to completely bypassing everything. The other one will take you into a physical rabbit hole. The other one will take you into a psychological rabbit hole where you think you're broken and damaged. And actually, it's true that in all of those things, in one way or another, your experience somewhat can get worse rather than better. But I want to highlight this as being a different approach, that is inclusive and understanding of all those different approaches to trauma, and that's why I love this, because it's like it took me all those years of doing all those things individually to see the connectedness of everything.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree with everything you just said, and that has been my experience from ascension to dissension to embodying all of it. It's all useful. It's all welcome. It's all relevant, but you have to see yourself as a whole, in a plethora of many wholes, and cellular beings that's changeable, and energetic beings that, have wisdom beyond even, what is currently known. And we hope to be able to take, you on a journey with us to explore more deeply your own innate brilliance from every aspect. That's what we're going to hope to do, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah. Yeah. Regardless, I always say, regardless of your own personal circumstances, regardless of what anyone's told you, regardless of what's happened to you, it's kind of like it's possible to live a beautiful life. Was there a couple of questions? Were they? Do you remember?
Let's have a couple of questions, but we're getting now to like 10 to 12. So I'm just thinking that maybe we can come back and save those two questions and speak specific, like do a session where we speak specifically to certain questions, because this has been more like
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
And maybe if there's other people with questions, feel free to put them in the group or send them to us, then we can do a session. I'd love to do that. If people have questions, I want to answer them. I want to talk to them. I want to look at them. And so, if people have got them, it's always a good opening for understanding and stuff like that. So feel free.
Definitely. And I think often people, because we're going to try and, when we do answer these questions, we're going to try and not get it into your personal detail, but speak through the lens of like what's actually going on, so let's start to come up and teach you guys how to do that. So I hope does that feel complete for you, Jason?
Yeah, that was great, and it's exciting, exciting to do this stuff with people and to get into this and really sort of go on this journey, go on it myself. I'm in this. In fact, what I should have said at the start was, don't listen to anything I've got to say. It's kind of like I wrote that in my book so many times. It's kind of like I don't want anyone to take my word for this. I want people to look for themselves. It's kind of like this is not, I know the answers and I'm going to teach you them. This is kind of like me just being a tour guide and kind of pointing to something that's happening, and always investigate for yourself. That's a good place for me to leave it. Always investigate for yourself, because direct experience is really the only teacher.
Well, and that's been both of our learnings, and there's no need to put us on pedestals. Like your wisdom will never be as our wisdom, will never be as amazing as your own wisdom. So yeah, just keep trusting yourself. Like that's ultimately what we will be trying to get you to, sort of step by step, gently by gently, understanding how your wisdom, your body, your knowing is what is the truth. And of course that's going to be different for everyone, but you can always trust yourself. You can always trust that. Hopefully you'll trust us as your guides, as we go on this exploration together. But yeah, always trust yourself. And thank you guys for watching. Lucy, Jem, Hayley, thank you, Hayley. And if you are watching, please do let us know so we can, you know, say hello virtually. And if you watch it later, please do let us know. And thank you so much for joining us if you have. And we're really super excited that you are here with us, and we're excited for what's about to unravel.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.